Today, Ellen and Ed McManus will share the story of their daughter Laura, an infant first declared normal, then learning a few months later that she had cerebral palsy. Please welcome Ellen and Ed.
Good morning, everyone. This is a challenge today to speak about Laura's life of 43 years in about 40 minutes. So I'm going to do my best. I am so happy to see that you came out. Some of you made special arrangements to be here, and that's much appreciated by our family. So Laura was born, and she will be here sometime during this presentation. She's being driven from New Lenox.
And her sister is here sitting in the front row, Joanna.
So Laura was born in 1976 at St. John's Hospital in Springfield, Illinois. We have some pictures on the screen that you can see. The first one has been up there for a while of Laura as a newborn with me after we got home. And then this one is of Michael and our family welcoming Laura after she came home from the hospital. Michael is Ed's son and our oldest son in our family. Is there another one there? Is there one of them that are smiling? Okay. And then that's a picture of Laura with her beautiful smile. So as Buzz mentioned, Laura was declared healthy at birth, and this, as I said, was in Springfield. And then 3 months later, we moved to Wilmette. And Wilmette is the home, which you see on the screen, of where Ed was born and raised in that family. And then we came back when Laura was a baby, and she too and the rest of our family was raised in this home. So it had a very, very special place in our heart, and it was in the same neighborhood. So Ed had many stories to tell the neighborhood about what it was like growing up there as a child. Around 4 to 5 months, we were aware that Laura wasn't meeting her developmental milestones, and some of that was complicated by the fact that she was born with a dislocated hip at birth, so she would have troubles rolling over, and some complications with sitting up. But other than that, we still did not have a roadmap or a GPS going forward. Do I need to?
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay. All right. Are you hearing me better now? Okay. So I had been introduced to a new friend who was a freelance writer for Family Focus. And Family Focus is a wonderful agency that existed at the time in Evanston that reached out to families with young children before they started school. And even though we were in the neighborhood in Wilmette, they were more than happy to welcome Laura into the center. And so she went there for a number of years, and it was a lifesaver to our family. They just absolutely were wonderful. So they had contracted with a freelance writer, Sally Graver, to write a document of our first 4 years with Laura, and hope to submit it to the Irving B. Ferris Foundation for funding for the center. And so, believe it or not, I had a copy of that document, and I took some brief notes from there to use today rather than to read it.
And that's a picture of myself and Laura on the front page of the Wilmette newspaper.
She
Whatever.
was in a field of prairie grass, and you can notice that her dad has very curly hair. I had thought during that first five months of Laura's life that something was wrong, but on the other hand, this was my first biological child, and I was not so sure of myself and what to expect of a young baby. She puzzled doctors that we were taking her to as we were trying to find out what was wrong, because she was such an engaged baby and child, always smiling, always looking into the eyes of others, and so it was difficult for them to figure out what was going on. Also keep in mind that this was 43 years ago and technology wasn't as perfected as it is now. We just didn't have things available to us as we do now. For an example, the CAT scan, which I ultimately agreed for her to have, was really designed for an adult and not a child. So these were the things that we were faced with trying to discover what her issue was. So because they couldn't find anything at the time that I was taking her, they began to think it was my problem, that I was bringing a baby in because I wanted this baby to be a high achiever. Really? That's not me. So they would tell me to go home, in 18 months, come back and she'll be walking into their office. Well, it was nearing a year, and I felt like still something was wrong and it had not been addressed. So then there were these undertone of questions that was being asked to me when I was going for her visits, such as, is this child being cared for by someone else? Are you spending undue amounts of time away from home from her? None of which was the case, because I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. Then she was admitted to Evanston Hospital for what they said was a bladder infection. So then one day a doctor comes in with a legal pad with a whole bunch of questions that he wanted to ask of me. So I was very conscientious and answered all of that he had asked for me to do. And they were very, very difficult questions because, again, they were directed toward me and whether or not I was a fit mother. The head nurse of the floor came in while the questioning was going on, and she was just absolutely shocked that the doctor was asking me these kinds of questions. So she let the doctor finish, and when the doctor walked out, of course, I fell into a heap of tears at Laura's bed. And she came over and she said, I am so sorry that this has happened. I had no idea that the doctor was going to do this, and I will speak to her. The doctor never saw me, never saw Laura, and so something happened where things were stopped on our behalf. So when I would be experiencing these doctor visits and hospital visits, my respite was to come to my own home, and I could sit in the rocking chair and rock Laura, my baby, and look out the window, look at her, and would be breastfeeding her. And she just had this sweet, angelic look on her face as she would look up at me. And somehow those were my ways of keep on going, that I knew we were going to work this out together sometime, someday, soon. So after a year old, she was seen by both a neurologist and an endocrinologist. And at first they thought it was a low thyroid, so they gave her some medicine for that and thought we would have positive results and that she would catch up by the age of 2. So then at 14 months old, I decided to go ahead and do the CAT scan, even though we knew that the picture wouldn't be absolutely clear because of the fact it was for an infant and not for an adult. So that did reveal that she had damage in the cerebellum at the base of the brain. And the endocrinologist was one of the nicest doctors that I had encountered at Children's, and he told me there was nothing that I could have done to have prevented this. It probably happened with a virus that I contacted during the first 4 to 6 weeks of fetal development. And then he said something beautiful that I have carried with me for the rest of my life. He said, first remember that she is your child, and secondly, she is a child with a disability. And that is something that I have carried with me for a lifetime. And it's something that those of us in the disability community are always trying to get that message out to the wider community. So then I had decided to switch neurologists because I didn't feel as comfortable with the neurologist that we had. So the new neurologist was going through the report of the first neurologist, and then she said something about children who have cerebral palsy. And so then I said, is that what you're saying our daughter has? And she said, yes. She says, hasn't anyone told you that? And then my answer was, no, no one had. So I was finding it out for the first time. So then we continued to do the best that we could in getting Laura as much help as she could during that 0 to 3 program, during the 0 to 3 age. And there was a program at Northwestern Hospital that was for persons with cerebral palsy, and it probably at that time was the best in the world. And it was near to our home, so it was easy for us to access it as a service. And then as she neared 3 years old, we did enroll her in the early childhood program at North Suburban Special Education. And her particular school that she went to was Stratford School for her services. You do see on the screen what an affectionate relationship Laura's brother had with Laura and how much she adored him as her big brother. And then is there one of Laura on the bed?
Now that's coming.
That's coming, okay. So then while she was at Stratford School, it was a segregated environment, but that was the choice for everyone at that time. And she did really well in that program. The teachers were very dedicated to her, and it was a relief for me to know that even though I couldn't correct the damage that had been done in utero, that I could do everything possible to make things as best as I could for her during those critical developmental years, during the first 7 years when the brain is doing the most amount of growing than the person's rest of their life. So then when she got to be 10 years old,
Wait a minute. I want the Joanna part.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. When Laura was about 4 years old and had started in Stratford School, Joanna, who's here today, was adopted as a baby, and so we welcomed her into our family of 5, and you can see a picture here of our oldest son, Michael, holding Joanna, and Laura is looking on and being so happy that our family had grown. And the relationship between Laura and Joanna was just absolutely wonderful. Do we have some more pictures here?
Yeah.
This is one where the two of them were playing together on the bed, and Laura is engaged with her, and they truly had their own sense of sisterhood during these earlier years. And here's one of Joanna whispering something into my ear, and I don't remember what it was, but then Laura was sort of whispering something a little bit later into Joanna's ears, and I'm sure they were talking about their mom. This was one of the first school pictures of Laura while she was at the special education. And then this is one as they grew older, that they still had this sister-to-sister relationship. And when Joanna was about 15 months old and she was playing with Laura in the family room, Laura started to cry, and I was in the kitchen, so I went in to find out what was going on. And Joanna was stroking Laura's legs. So she had already by then sensed that there was something wrong with her sister, that her sister couldn't walk, and in her own way she was comforting her until I came in. And I thought that that insight was quite profound and amazing, and I was so grateful that I saw this happening. So then when Laura was about 10 years old, the school social worker at the time was advising us to have Laura placed out of home because of the fact that she was nonverbal and non-ambulatory. It was the last thing that had crossed our mind. This is not something that we wanted to do, but we also felt that maybe we should follow the advice of the school social worker. If I had all of the wisdom and knowledge that I have now, I never would have done that. But it was all for the sake of Laura if indeed it would help her to continue services at some point into her future and would make it better, then that is what drove us to make that decision. So she moved to a group home in Wheaton. Her school experience was absolutely wonderful. Integration was just being introduced among the educators at that time, but the school hadn't started a formal program to integrate children with special needs into the regular ed classroom with supports and services. So these kids, oh, here she comes.
Oh,
Hi.
here comes Laura.
Hi, Laura. She's going to be a little bit overwhelmed. She hasn't been here for a long time. Hi.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Amanda.
Laura, we'll come down and sit by you in just a little bit. And we're talking about you and the school that you went to when you were about 10 years old. So the kids at school saw Laura was out on the playing ground, and they wanted to wheel her chair. They wanted her to be involved in throwing balls, anything that they could think of. They wanted her to be a part of the group. And then these same children started to go in and tell their regular ed teacher that they wanted Laura to come into the pioneer days that were happening in their classroom. And so the regular ed teacher was open-minded about it, and Laura was invited in and enjoyed every bit of it. And so then there was also another one where they wanted to take her to the gym, and I was there for visiting that day. Here I was, a former regular ed teacher, and they were teaching me about how to make adaptations. So they said, we're going to do our requirement for what we need for our PE class today, and then Laura's going to jump rope with us too. So then they instructed, I had a friend with me, and the two of us were to hold the jump rope with Laura so that we could do hand over hand and swing the rope around so the kids would jump through. And she just absolutely loved that. So then one of the children from the school went home and told her parents that Laura was the most popular most popular child in their school, which dearly warmed our hearts. However, the home situation was not what we had desired. I had found out that one of the staff people had her children taken away from her and placed in foster home. And it made me wonder then why she was working in a home with children and with children with special needs, and their own children had been taken away. And so then I hired our own person who lived out in the DuPage area by contact, found out about, and I asked her to go in and spend time with Laura after school. And I just told her that it was because Laura was used to one-on-one time, and they had 5 other children in that home, and this way Laura would have some one-on-one attention. So she called me at the end of her first day being there, and she said, this home is not good for Laura, and it's not good for any of the other children. So I asked her, could you tell me why you think that? So she said during dinner, one of the staff people was yelling at Laura for not eating, and then he walked over toward her, and she cowed her head, and it indicated that she was fearing that he was going to strike her. So at that point, we knew that we had to take her out of there and make arrangements for another plan for her. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ed.
Do you want to go down and say hi? Okay, now it's my turn. Joanna, when you had to go out to get Laura, you missed all the pictures about you, so I went back and showed them all. Laura has come all the way from Joliet today, where she has been living temporarily, and her caregiver, Aunt Amanda, who who was there on the front row, drove down and picked her up. So we'll tell you about that later. But back to the story, at the time that Laura was in the group home, the village of Wilmette was considering adopting an ordinance that would allow group homes for people with disabilities in Wilmette. There was a huge amount of opposition. There's an organization that was created. I'm trying to remember their slogan, but it was something like "Keep Wilmette like Wilmette" or something. You know, in other words, keep people out who don't belong here, which we were appalled by. They had a big public hearing, and I got up and testified in favor of the ordinance, and I said how ironic it was that we have a daughter who is living in a group home in Wheaton because the village of Wheaton allows group homes and our own village doesn't. And a guy stood up at the other side of the auditorium and hollered, "If you don't like Wilmette, why don't you move to Wheaton?" So the place went up for grabs at that point. In the group home, there were 7 children, and we were really the only parents who came to visit regularly. We came twice a week, and it was about an hour's drive for us out there. And then we made some complaints about the conditions in the home, which was a big mistake, because then we got a registered letter from the agency saying that they could no longer serve Laura, and the reason that they gave, of course, was not because we had been complaining, but because Laura was too advanced, which was, you know, she wasn't any more advanced than any of the other kids. So we complained to the state, which is the Division of Developmental Disability, but we also started planning for her return home. And we were able to get some wonderful support from a couple of legislators. And then we went to the Division of DD, and in the meantime, we had formed a nonprofit organization. The board of directors was made up of our friends, and we asked the state if they would be willing to transfer the money that they were spending on Laura to this nonprofit. And it was suggested to us that this would be a more acceptable way of doing it than giving the money to us, the family. And this has become quite a common thing these days. It's the concept of the money follows the person. And this kind of a setup would be referred to as a microboard. But in those days, nobody ever heard of microboards, and so it was quite unusual that the state was willing to do this. And undoubtedly, it was because we had some really heavy support from the legislature. So we had some political clout, frankly. So the division agreed to do this. I think it was the first time that they had ever done it. And the money that our organization got enabled them to hire caregivers to come and live in our home. And then Laura was going to school during the week, and the caregivers would come after school and stay until bedtime, and then they would be there all day Saturday and Sunday. And of course, we covered the overnights. So things were working really well at home, but we found ourselves in litigation with the school district because we wanted Laura to be in an integrated program. In those days, we called it integration, and later it was known as inclusion, meaning including kids with disabilities with kids without them. And that's what we had out in Wheaton. As Ellen mentioned, even though the residential part was not good, the school experience in Wheaton was wonderful. They really had an integrated program. So the folks in Wilmette and on the North Shore did not want to do that. And we said we want Laura to be able to go to her home school where Joanna was going. So we had mediation, and then in the meantime we had an agreement that she would attend Wilmette Junior High, where Joanna was going, for half a day, and would continue to go to the segregated school in Highland Park, Stratford, for half a day. The mediation broke down, and then the school school district asked for a formal hearing, and they lost, but they appealed, and then they won the appeal. So then we had no choice but to go to court at that point. We went into federal court, and we had a wonderful lawyer by the name of Matt Cohen who represented us. This went on, if you can believe it, for 4.5 years that we were in this legal battle with the district. In the meantime, I decided to run for the local school board, and I was elected. And so every month when our board would meet, they would be discussing the strategy for the lawsuit, and then of course I'd have to go out in the hall while the rest of the board discussed our case. McManus versus District 39. The litigation was very painful. Some of the teachers testified against us, and then we had to work with these people on a day-to-day basis. And in later years, they came up to us in various places and said, we're really sorry. We were on your side, but we were forced to do this, in order to keep our jobs. In the meantime, now I need to skip forward here. In the meantime, Laura graduated from the junior high, and that's me giving her her diploma. And look how excited. There you are, Laura. See you. That's you up there in the wheelchair. Since I was on the school board, I got to give not only Laura but Joanna their diplomas when they graduated from the junior high. Then we thought, well, surely New Trier High School is going to realize that we're serious about this, but they didn't, and they refused to settle the lawsuit. And so then now New Trier became a defendant, and she started attending New Trier for half a day and Highland Park High School for half a day, because New Trier High School just did not accept kids with severe disabilities, and Highland Park High School did. So eventually the federal judge ruled in our favor, and Laura became the first child with a severe disability to attend New Trier full time. And it became a landmark case. You can find it in the law books today. So that was something that we were very happy about. And now I'll turn it back over to Ellen.
I just wanted to add. I just wanted to add on to this that as time went on, many other families were able to use that lawsuit for their own family member and have come back to thank us. And I will say that at the time that we did it, we had no idea what impact it would have for other families, but how grateful we were that they were able to access it, and it still goes on to this day. When you're in something like that, as you can imagine, you're just surviving day to day with your child, and having, you can't even wrap around yourself to what it would mean to have others benefit, but it did happen, and we are glad for it. So I wanted to share a little bit about what integration was for Laura at New Trier. She was in a regular ed homeroom, and she participated in activities and projects that were generated by the students. She did have a one-on-one aide, so this made it even more.
Laura's taking notes.
Are you criticizing your mom, Laura? All right, you can tell me later what you have to say about your notes. This one-on-one aid really helped her to be more fully integrated, and so we were grateful for that as well. So she had classes in art making. She loved pottery at the time. She did cooking. She did adaptive social studies. And in her own special ed classroom, they had come together with a collection of computer games that were educational, and then they transferred them so that they would be at the computers in the library. So instead of playing with those games in the special ed room, she went to the library where other students were, and they were there doing their work, their research, and she was at the computer. And it was a way for her to learn what the code of conduct is in a library and be engaged in a library such as anyone else would be at the computer, but hers was individualized for her needs. And those kinds of experiences that she had during her high school really helped her out so much, understanding code of conducts into the larger community. Because certainly she used our home library in Wilmette. She was using the YMCA in Evanston and other things in our community that she began to realize that she could be there, but there were rules to follow as well. So she would take her own notes during some of the social studies classes that we had adapted, and if someone looked at her notes, they would have thought of them as just scribbles. But eventually, when she started the Arts of Life, which I will be talking about in a little bit, those scribbles became a part of her art design, and they add quite an interesting delight to her paintings. Are you wanting to say something?
Yeah, that's Ed.
Okay, go for
I
it.
need the mic.
Okay.
Along the way, Ellen became very active as an officer of a statewide group called the Illinois Parents for Inclusive Communities, which promoted inclusion of kids with disabilities in schools. She was the founder of the Illinois Family Support Network, which still exists today, 30 years later, which was a group of parents who were pushing for more money from the state for what was called the Home-Based Services Program, which is a program that enables parents to hire workers to help care for their kids. And I don't know how she got 3 meals on the table a day because she had so many activities that she's going down to Springfield and meeting with legislators. She joined the board of an organization called Neighborhood Services, which was operating small group homes, a different type of group home in which the caregiver lives with the individuals. And it's they only allowed 2 people with disabilities plus the caregiver to live together. Most group homes, have staff that they call it shift staff, where they come in and work shifts, but they don't live there. This model of residential facility is called shared living. Then along the way, I went to work for the state for the Division of Developmental Disabilities. I started out there as a lawyer, and then I became the statewide coordinator of this very home-based program that Ellen was the chief advocate for. This became really awkward because Ellen would write a letter to the director of the division saying we really need more money for the program, and the director would hand the letter, and of course I was part of writing the letter. The director would hand the letter to me and ask me to draft a response, and then I would say something like, dear Mrs. McManus, thank you for your letter. We will take it under advisement, and get back to you within 5 years. And so then the letter would come in the mail the next day to our house, the letter from the director. So then Ellen decided at this point that it probably would be a good idea to step down. It was just too much of a conflict of interest. And finally, Laura aged out of high school at the age of 22. The kids with disabilities are entitled to stay longer than the rest of the kids. And so under the state law, they can stay until 22. So then this is a picture of Laura being pushed down the aisle at the high school graduation. I guess was she the first one in the line? It looks like that. And then this is an actual picture of her getting her diploma. And she's very excited. There you are, Laura, from one of the members of the school board. And then this is a cake that says, "Congratulations, Laura, you made it, and so did we." Then at that point, the state agreed to provide funding to neighborhood services so that Laura could move into one of these very homes, a shared living home that I mentioned before. And Laura was able to purchase a condo just a few blocks away from us in Wilmette. Her grandmother had left her some money in her will, and there was a state program which was called the Home of Your Own program that assisted people with disabilities in purchasing property. And so then that's a picture of the building where she still lives 20 years later, and it's over at the corner of 4th and Linden. Laura and another young woman named Beth moved in to that building in 1998 along with a live-in caregiver, and our friend Winky Zachary was hired to take care of Laura during the day. And there's a picture of Winky and Beth and Laura. Look how happy Laura looks. Okay, over to you.
So I wanted to share a little bit about what shared living is like in this kind of a home setting. It's really, if one embraces what we hope to have happen, it's really 3 roommates living together with one person who has additional responsibilities. So there is equality in decision-making to the extent that can be. So in the home, everybody shares in the shopping, the cooking, assisting with household responsibilities, and each of them have their own bedroom. It's a 19-unit condo, and since Laura is the owner of the condo on paper, I, as the landlord, am on duty at 2:30 in the morning if there's any floods. So then the other unit owners do not refer to Laura's unit as a unit with people that have disabilities. It is Laura McManus's unit, and she's the owner. And again, this is a pretty powerful message. So during the day, each of the roommates who get supports have their own day programs and activities in the community. And some of the highlights for Laura was that she created her own business called McManus McShredder. And she would put the shredded paper into baskets that became gift holiday baskets, which she sold, obviously with the help of her family. She also did shredded paper for real estate offices, and she did it for a pet shop in Wilmette. And again, these are ways for her to be in her own community and be doing meaningful things in a way that others do take note by observation, and some people would follow it up with asking very positive questions about it. She also delivered flowers to patients at Northwestern Hospital. And I, at the time, was working at the Women's Hospital, so she would deliver them to the patients that were there for surgeries and whatever, and then she did some in the section where I was working. And it was just a really, really beautiful experience, because she handled a patient, a bouquet. Certainly they were so happy that they were being remembered by someone special, but they also would look at the person who was giving it And for that moment, it probably gave them a different insight in their own health and what they were facing for their life, and knew that Laura had it and will have it for all of her life. She also did most recently was the cashier for a cafe in Highland Park District, and it was organized by Best Futures, which was, again, groups of moms that made this happen. And so she was there at the cashier. She loved giving money out, but there certainly was an assistant with her to make that some of the money went back in. Otherwise, Laura would have been filling it up with her pockets and having a good time afterward, or so she thought. Eventually, the 5 of us mothers through North Suburban Special Ed got acquainted with each other, and we were pretty progressive and forward thinkers, and we were thinking not only for our kids and their specific disabilities, but we wanted to be thinking wider and broader. So we decided to write a grant of our own and petition the state for a day program that was without walls, meaning that everything that the persons who had exited from the high school would be doing in the community and not in a segregated setting. And we wrote it, we presented it, and to our surprise, it was granted to us, and we were able to pick the agency that we wanted to run the program. So this was quite empowering for us. We never believed that we would be given this much power in a good way. And so we created a program called the ACT program, Adult Community Transition Program, and that is what the ex-students from their regular schools would go out into the community, to the library, to the YWYMCA, to the Glen and Glenview, and did walking around the track. Park districts were very receptive to this group of young adults using their community. And so it just took a few conversations with them, and then they were very cooperative. So it was a very successful program, and it continues to be. Along the way, a friend of mine had told me that I should really check out Arts of Life in Glenview. And so I decided, I didn't know if Laura could do a whole day of art making. And so I decided that I would go and spend a day in the studio with the participants that were there. And at the end of the day, I thought to myself, there was just such a wonderful, welcoming community of other artists who were doing beautiful work and were persons with disabilities. So I thought, let us give it a try. And so I said to the staff, I said that Laura may not produce very much art in the first couple of months, but I said, let her roam. I don't want her to interfere with any other artist that is doing their work. But I said she's an observer, and she absorbs what's going on in her own way, and that kind of way if she's not pulled back to her desk to do her work. So they were very respectful of it, and Laura was very respectful of the artists themselves. So one day, Laura goes up to her art station. She paints a painting. She finishes it. She puts it on her lap, and she wheels over to the manager of the studio and tapped the manager on her shoulder. And Hillary looked down, and she said, "Oh," she said, "I think Laura has something to show to you today." And she said, "Laura, would you hold up your picture?" And Laura did, and the entire studio clapped their hands, and it was a welcome of her into their community. And from there on, she has continued to go 3 days a week doing wonderful abstract art. And I wanted to do a shout out to Ann Cawley. Would you wave your hand, Ann? She's the development director of the Arts of Life, both in Glenview and the one that's in the city in Chicago on Grand Avenue. And it's just an absolutely beautiful community in a way that is just special unto its own. Every year they have annual awards and everybody gets an award. And some of the ways in which they describe their awards are just so inspiring. So one year they gave an award to Laura because she helped them become better instructors. And that was so amazing to think that those that were helping the artists were being helped and understood more because of the ways in which they were able to observe Laura teaching them. So it was kind of a new concept for me and one that was just so special. And then one year she became the Artist of the Year for her artwork. And you can see in both of these pictures that she just has so much enthusiasm because she knows that she's with people that know her and who love her dearly. And then this picture is one of the Halloween parties where they all dress up and they have a grand time with a big lunch and all kinds of games. This picture is one of Laura's makings, and it was displayed at Carson Peary Scott a few years back. The studio tries to do a lot of outreach to the community to get the work out of the artist. So she was sitting there at that time, enjoying her own picture in a quiet moment. And then we had an art display of her work here at the Ethical. And so her pictures were up on the wall. She and Joanna were sitting together, and it was a beautiful night. All of our dear friends came, some of who are here, and were able to see the wonders of her work. Well, actually, maybe we can we're going to pass this out now or wait until the question and answers?
Go ahead.
Okay. One of the paintings that I mentioned before that Laura did of her own that was very much like a famous artist, Joan Mitchell, and this was discovered. We're going to pass this around so you'll be able to see it. But this particular picture of Laura's was discovered by one of the staff people at Arts of Life, which I may have mentioned before. And he was just struck by the similarity. And Laura had never seen any of Joan Mitchell's artwork at all. So we have had a little contest over the years, and today we thought it would be fun to do that during the question and answer period, we will pass this around and just put a check mark to the side which of these two pictures you think might be Laura's. And then we have the real picture here. So when you go out to the coffee room, you'll see if you guessed right. I will confess that when I took this for the first time myself without seeing the picture that Laura had done, I guessed wrong. So I will be sympathetic towards you.
And this Joan Mitchell sold this painting this painting was sold for $200,000 at an auction. So we are anticipating that someday Laura is going to be very wealthy. And then we said she's going to move into this big mansion, and then we're going to have a big party for all the people who guessed right. But mom isn't going to be able to go, unfortunately. So then the next big event in our life was the birth of our granddaughter, Kaylee Brody, who is Joanna's daughter. And this is a picture of Laura. Laura was just crazy about Kaylee, and sometimes little baby Kaylee was a little bit nervous, like sitting in Laura's lap, because you wasn't real sure what Laura was going to do next. She might smother her with affection, literally. And so this is a picture of one of the caregivers who was living there a number of years ago, Elizabeth London, and her husband Jason, as well as Laura and Kaylee. And this is a picture of Laura going to Great America. So skipping forward, after 18 years at the condo in Wilmette, Neighborhood Services went out of business. There was not enough money coming in from the state for them to continue to exist. And it just broke our heart because it's such a wonderful little agency, and it had provided so much care to our daughter as well as so many other people. But I think most of you probably are unaware that Illinois is way, way behind the rest of the country in serving people with disabilities. We are 47th of the 50 states. We used to say, thank God for Mississippi, or we would be last. So that was the reality, and there just was not enough money for Neighborhood Services to continue. So another agency by the name of Trinity Services, which is located in Joliet, took over the care of Laura as well as a whole bunch of other people in 2016. Last year, Laura was moved temporarily to Joliet, and that is a story, that's a long, complicated story that I don't want to get into right now. But at this moment, Laura is still in Joliet, and we've actually selected another agency to operate the home, and our longtime friend, Amanda Zachary, who I introduced before, has agreed to be the caregiver, and she's actually the sister of Winky Zachary, who you saw a picture of earlier. So the bottom line is that we are hoping to be able to bring Laura back very soon. Oh, this is a picture of Amanda. And these are taken off of Facebook, so even though Amanda's embarrassed, people have already seen it on Facebook. So now it's up. Now it's for you to follow through, right?
I did want to say something before. Was my lavalier on? I did want to say that as you're checking off this during question and answer period, that afterward, Laura will be passing out one of her paintings called The Risk Taker that was put to a postcard size, and she will have it in a pink envelope, her favorite color, and along with some other information from Arts of Life. And so Anne and Laura and Amanda will be over to the side table, and please visit so you can take this card home with you, and then also some other information about Arts of Life. I'm going to conclude, and I'm going to go down to be with Laura in just a minute. I wrote, and from time to time I have done this, I write a letter in first person as if Laura was speaking, and I have kept those over the years, and so this was one that I wanted to read in conclusion of our presentation of Laura speaking to the best that I could imagine her to speak. So in just a minute now I'm going to go down, and Laura, I'm going to give you your own folder so you can do it with me.
You want to take this down?
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Then the lavalier is turned Many people at first glance tend to focus on my disability rather than my ability to have a meaningful life. I enjoy the simple things that others may take for granted. The joy of getting together with my family, times with me, with my older funny brother, and the pure sweetness of my own little niece with her mom, who is my sister. I keep secrets well, I give high fives with gusto, and I hope that I'm the source of inspiration to others by my very presence. I didn't choose to be born with a significant disability. Oh boy. But having it doesn't keep me from wheeling around, wheeling forward, always forward. I was a little bit overcome by that, but thank you, Laura, for letting us share this.
Thanks for such an uplifting presentation. You mentioned early on that when Laura was at one of her homes that you were the only parents that regularly visited. I would hate to think that that's the norm for these types of people, but is that is there a lot of parents that, my word, abandon their children in this way? That's kind of terrible, but I mean, is that unfortunately the way it is?
John, it really is unfortunate, and it's very sad. It's very, very sad, and I, as a parent, we as parents can only observe this. It's possible now, particularly with the ones that we are thinking of, that their parents have died and they do not have relatives to come and visit. But it could be the other way, that a family had decided to have their child placed into a home, and either it was too painful for them to come back to be involved in their child's life, or in some cases, parent involvement with their children once they are placed in a group home sometimes is not appreciated, and some people have the idea that once you quote unquote turn your child over, they take over, and you're pretty much out of their lives, and all of that does impact the quality of their life, and we saw quite a bit of that during the past year and a half, and it makes us so sad.
I really respect the way you fought to have Laura included at Woburn Junior High and at New Trier High School, but I was just wondering why you chose to fight for her inclusion there, rather than move to a place that was already including students with Laura's type of disability.
Buzz, can you help me? I have a hearing problem.
Sure. The question was, why did you fight to get Laura into New Trier, which didn't have a program, instead of sending her to a school? Okay. Instead of moving to a suburb that had a school with programs.
So the question is, why was it that we didn't move her into a high school that had programs?
Why didn't we move?
Oh, why didn't we move? Rochelle, that's a good question. I'm going to think about that and maybe respond in a minute. I'm going to let Ed.
Well, I mean, frankly, we didn't even consider that because we were established in our home and we felt like that would just be giving in. So we decided that the only thing to do was to fight it. for as long as it took, and we eventually were successful. But I mean, you're right, we could have just moved somewhere else, but we had, it was a very special home that I had grown up in, and we just weren't prepared to move out of the New Trier school district.
I'd almost like to address my question directly to Joanna, but I'm not sure if that's allowed or appropriate. But I'm wondering what the effect was on your other children of all the time, energy, effort that you had to put into taking care of all these myriad legal battles and whatnot. That must have drained time and resources away from your other kids. And do they feel like they got short shrift, or did you somehow managed to make time and energy for them, and how did their lives turn out compared to Laura's? Thanks.
Thank you. It's what I grew up with, so that's all that I knew. So I don't know. I mean, I'm the baby of the family, so I came in, that's how I came, that's all I knew about. She's my sister, that's all I know.
If I may add to that, it was quite amazing that Joanna handled it the way that she did, and there were times that she did feel that Laura got all of the attention, and we were very aware of that. And we used to say at the table when we would have meals together, if we're talking too much about Laura, tell us, shout at us, and tell us not to do this because it's unfair to you. And sometimes we would, her dad took Joanna to Florida, just the two of them, and had a great time at Disney World, and other things that we tried to do that would make up some of the time that she didn't have with just us alone. We had the wonderful caregivers that we had coming into the home were very sensitive to the fact that Joanna probably felt that way, and they took an interest, a special interest in her, and one in particular, after she had spent a long Saturday with our family, would take Joanna back to her house, and they would do fun things together and developed a relationship. And Teresa was her first name, and we continue to keep in touch with her because she was so special. I think that what Joanna was saying, it was as it was, and it's sort of like, she was born into this, and I think that she did an amazing job. But we also recognize that there were times that were very hard for her, and we appreciate the fact that she hung in there with her sister, and we also embrace the good that she did, but understand that it must have been hard if we were in her shoes as well. And then her older brother, he was 9 years older than Laura at the time that Laura was born, and there was times that he thought of her just as his little sister. He didn't really think of her with the labels that other people would think of, but there were times that he felt too, I am sure, the same way that Joanna did. When he was, after Laura was born, we really tried very hard on Sundays to dedicate it to a family day, and Michael got to choose what we would do. So we would start out pretty early in the day and be gone for the whole day doing fun things that he enjoyed, and Laura was so used to, Laura was very cooperative to whatever we had decided that was of his interest.
When they were very little, Joanna used to play with her Legos on the floor, And of course, Laura was on the floor all the time because she couldn't walk, so she was crawling around. So then Laura would get into these beautiful Legos that her sister was creating. So we gave Nora the name Godzilla, and we'd say, "Uh-oh, Godzilla is attacking the Legos." I wanted to introduce two people who have come in who have been Laura's caregivers in the past. One of them is Brittany. Can you stand up, Brittany? And the other is Tashika. And these two ladies did a wonderful job over the years taking care of Laura, so thank you for coming.
Are there any more? I think this will have to be the last question.
What are the options for people to live away from their families when they become adults? It sounds like the options are narrowing from what you're saying. What options are there, especially for people without the resources that Laura has?
Yeah, it's a very sad state of affairs in Illinois. As I mentioned, elsewhere in the country, if you have a disability, it is pretty automatic that the state will provide funding for that person to be cared for either in a group home or in one of these programs that we mentioned, the home-based program where people continue to live in regular homes. The state of Illinois, and I worked there all those years. It was just so hard to have all these families. A lot of my job involved trying to deal with families who were calling me up and begging for services for their son or daughter, and the money was not there, and we had to say no. And I continue to do that work today as a consultant. But we do have a robust system of services for people with developmental disabilities. It's just that there isn't enough of it, so people are on a long waiting list, and then ultimately they may get chosen either to live in a group home or to receive funding through the home-based services program. But it's a rough situation. There's a lot of people that are waiting a long time on that list.
And can I add one more thing? Some of you may know I'm in the same situation. I have a 25-year-old son who's living at home, but he's in a wheelchair and has the same kind of disabilities here. And we were fortunate enough to be picked for the home-based SILA program. The SILA is the group home, which you think, yeah, you've won the lottery. We've been on the waiting list for almost 20 years, and we finally got the funding to put him in a group home, except there are no spaces. And so even when the state offers you the money, if you can't find an agency that has an opening for somebody age, sex, disability level, because you can't just go into any space, it has to be a good match, right? You wouldn't want to put somebody, an old man with behavioral problems with a young, vulnerable woman in a wheelchair, right? So you have to have it matched. So even when there's money following the person, you can't necessarily get the right services. And the problem I always thought was there aren't enough homes. So my son's father and I volunteered to buy a home so that he could go there. And all the agencies we approached said it's because of the low wages, the minimum wage. We can't get enough people to work here with any continuity. And so we can't even open new homes. We have the capital to purchase an open home, but we can't staff it adequately. And so that's the political message that we need to get out, is it's not just enough to make money up here. You've got to pay people enough for them to be interested in providing care like these three wonderful ladies here today do. You know, you want your kid to be well cared for, you find adequate staff. Thanks.
Everything that you said is so true, and it's just such an uphill battle. Just this past week, these 3 moms that I talked about that developed this day program, we met with the legislators in our area, and we had parents come and tell their stories. You would have been a perfect person to come and tell a story like you have told this morning, because they too were telling their legislators what they're faced with. In some cases, they have family members that are doing, the individual with a disability is doing harm to themselves and harm to the family that is really extreme, and they're on a crisis list to get funding, and it still hasn't happened. But hearing those personal stories does make an impact on the legislators, and so we always say go to the legislators in your district, and sometimes they can call the Department of Development of Disabilities and get through that way, because they can read on the paper what the statistics are, but when they hear it from the voice of the family member talking, it's powerful. And we have, in our particular area, we have wonderful legislators, and we had representation or persons from their office there. And sometimes we have even had legislators call us up and say, how should I vote on this bill? So somehow I feel like that is our only hope in some ways to get things to move. And sometimes you're advocating for your own family member, but just remember that when you do that, it's an act of responsibility that you want to do for your family member, and not an act of greed where you feel like you're taking something that somebody else is on the list and should have. I think we just have to stand up and advocate. We're advocating for our own kids, and then ultimately you're advocating for your own kid, even as your kid has got money. Is just a way of letting them know what the day-to-day struggle is once you do have some funding or some hope that your child will be selected.
Thanks again.